Before we talk about speaking to persuade, in Dr. Lucas's The Art of Public Speaking, chapter 16, 13th edition, I want to talk a little bit about this image over here. This is a picture of a lady using a microphone to speak. Using a microphone to speak is actually very challenging. There's a couple of things you should keep in mind. First of all, if it's a wired mic, you don't want to trip on the wire, so pay attention to where it's at. Second of all, you need to hold it far enough away from your mouth so that people can still hear you, but so you don't pop your P's in the microphone, and then it's difficult for people to understand, plus they're irritated and it hurts their ears. If you're going to use a wireless mic, practice with the wireless mic. Wear an outfit that it's easy to clip, whether it's on your belt or your pants, as long as your pants aren't going to fall down with a microphone hanging on there. And you want to make sure that people can hear you. Again, don't get the mic too close to your mouth. Get it close enough for people to hear, but far enough away so that it's not blocking the message that you're trying to send. If you're going to be persuasive, these are good ideas to keep in mind, especially if you have to use a microphone. So, what is persuasion? There are actually entire classes on persuasion in the communication discipline. But here we're going to have a crash course in public speaking and persuasion. Persuasion here, and always, is creating, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or actions. In my public speaking classes, my students actually give two different types of persuasive speeches. The one that helps people change their beliefs or their attitudes, and then the other one where they are called to some sort of action. So you need to be ethical when you are being a persuasive speaker. You want to have ethical goals. In other words, don't be trying to manipulate people. And you need to use ethical methods. In other words, bring facts, statistics, data, and stories to back up the arguments that you're making. There are certain degrees of persuasion. You can be slightly opposed, or the audience can be slightly opposed, moderately opposed, strongly opposed, moderately opposed, slightly opposed, neutral, slightly in favor, moderately in favor, or strongly in favor. Persuasion actually involves any movement by a listener from left to right. You are convincing them of something if they move from where their position was, either into neutral or moderately opposed, or maybe they're moving to slightly in favor. Any movement along this scale is considered persuasion. A mental dialogue is what you're having with the audience when you're trying to be persuasive. It is a mental give and take between the listener and the speaker. Who is your target audience? This is the portion of the audience that you are most trying to persuade as a speaker. We often have target audiences when we are doing the news, when we are doing advertisements, and even when we are giving speeches. There is a particular segment of the audience that we are most trying to persuade. In a persuasive speech, you are going to address a question of fact, a question of value, or a question of policy. A question of fact deals with the truth or falsity of an assertion. We are going to use first Dr. Lucas's question of fact. The question of fact example: to persuade my audience that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. The central idea is there are 3 good reasons to believe that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. And then the 3 main points. One of my favorite things is to talk about questions of fact. So if you were in Dr. Heidi's class, which you are right now, I would be talking about a question of fact concerning whether we believe that we landed on the moon or didn't land on the moon, or at least that somebody landed on the moon or didn't land on the moon, whether Elvis is dead or Elvis is alive. If Elvis was alive, he'd be about the same age as my parents. And Tupac, you remember him, right? Is he dead or alive? We don't know. But there are people who believe that they have facts to prove either argument on either side of those issues that I just mentioned. So that could be a question of fact. A question of value is something that we might argue. This deals with the worth or rightness or wrongness of an idea or action. Dr. Lucas's question of value example includes a specific purpose: to persuade my audience that elephant trophy hunting is legally and morally wrong. The central idea is elephant trophy hunting violates international accords and our duty to treat animals humanely. He gives the examples of 3 main points here. Or actually, I guess there's only 2 main points here. But it does talk about elephant trophy hunting. Then we move on to a question of policy. This is whether a course of action should or should not be taken. There's passive agreement, which convinces the audience that a policy is good and desirable. It avoids encouraging action to support the policy. It just tells you whether, or asks you to believe whether it is right or wrong. A while ago, we had discussions about smoking bans in many states, about whether that was right or wrong, moral or immoral. And we were just asking for passive agreement. We weren't actually asking people to do anything about it in particular. A passive agreement example that Dr. Lucas has is to persuade my audience that there should be stricter policy standards on companies that offer personal genetic testing. There's also the type of speech that requires a request for immediate action on a policy. This convinces the audience to act in support of a policy. If we were using my smoking ban example, we would actually ask people to stop smoking or request that restaurants or bars that they visit or that they patronize actually stop allowing smoking within the building to protect their workers from secondhand smoke. Dr. Lucas's example here is an immediate action example. The specific purpose: to persuade my audience to donate to the Wounded Warrior Project. Policy issues that we might address through a speech of policy would be a need, a plan, and practicality. The need of this type of speech is there is a problem that requires change from the current policy. So we need to know, okay, why are we changing this? What's the problem? How are we going to change it? What is the speaker's plan to solve the problem with the current policy? Practicality. Will the plan solve the problem, or will the plan create new problems? Those are things that we need to think about when we are providing a plan. We also have to figure out how to organize a policy speech. There's problem solution, problem cause solution, comparative advantages, and something called Monroe's motivated sequence. A problem solution speech, the first main point documents that there is the existence of a problem, and the second main point presents the solution to the problem. Then there's the problem solution example from Dr. Lucas's textbook. The specific purpose is to persuade my audience that the U.S. Congress should pass legislation that will reduce lead levels in the nation's water supply. The central idea is because lead in the water supply is a serious problem in the United States, Congress should pass legislation reducing lead levels in our water. This problem solution speech is likely based on the incidents that happened in Flint, Michigan, but that do happen all over the United States. The main points here are given for the problem solution speech example that we just heard. Then there is the problem cause solution way of organizing a speech, a persuasive speech. Main point 1 documents the problem, main point 2 analyzes the causes, and main point 3 presents the solution. The example here from this textbook is to persuade my audience that the actions required to deal with the problem of childhood obesity. The central idea: childhood obesity is a serious problem that can be controlled by changes in diet and exercise. Then we have the main point examples, 1, 2, and 3, problem, cause, solution. There is also the type of speech called comparative advantages. Each main point explains why one solution is preferable to others. Now, of course, in this textbook, they are going to give us an example of comparative advantages, and then they're going to show the main points of comparative advantages. Well, I usually like to give this comparative advantage speech or example in my class. So I drive a Ford F-150. It is a half-ton truck. That means it can haul a half-ton of stuff, right? There's other half-ton trucks out there. There is the Dodge Ram, or just Ram now, still made by the same company, but only called the Ram, and the Chevy. The Ram and Chevy are called 1500. Now, I know that there are other trucks out there, but these are going to be the 3 comparative advantages, and I'm going to tell you why the Ford F-150 is superior to the other 2 vehicles that I've mentioned. We could also add things like the Nissan Titan, the Toyota Tundra, and so on and so forth. I like to give this as an example because most people can relate. The last thing that we're going to address for a way to organize a persuasive speech is Monroe's motivated sequence. It's a 5-step sequence for speeches that seek immediate action. Why is it called Monroe's motivated sequence? Well, because a guy named Alan Monroe invented it, or came up with it, or at least helped us to understand it better. So, there are 5 steps of the motivated sequence. First is the attention step, where you want to gain the attention of the audience. This is also where you can tell about the problem or that there is a problem. Then you need to show a need for change in the need step. Satisfaction is where you provide the solution. Visualization is often what I call like fortune telling or telling the future. We are showing what the future will look like if we enhance. This is enhancing the solution by visualizing benefits. So help us to see what the future will look like if we follow the recommendations that you're making as a speaker, or help us to see what the future will look like if we don't do what you are asking. And the last thing is action. You want to urge action for a solution. And this makes perfect sense, especially for an actuation or an action persuasive speech. Here is an example of Monroe's motivated sequence as explained in Dr. Lucas's textbook. To persuade my audience to take class notes by hand instead of computer. That might be a good idea. The central idea is you can learn more and get better grades if you take class notes by hand rather than using a computer. When I was in school, I took notes by hand and then I typed them up when I was studying for a test. This made it easier for me to remember. But whichever way you do it, as long as you're taking the notes yourself, I think you're doing a good job. However, the person giving this speech may disagree with me. And of course, at the end of the presentational aid for this textbook, there is a sample speech. You are certainly welcome to go check out the sample speech. You're also welcome to look up persuasive sample speeches online. Hopefully, you got something out of how to persuade. Now, let's get down and dirty. When was the last time you persuaded someone? That's right. You probably persuaded someone to go out for supper when restaurants are open. You probably persuaded someone to go to the movies when movie theaters are open. Or you persuaded somebody to watch a movie that you wanted to watch. You persuaded somebody to order supper so that you didn't have to cook. You persuaded somebody to do your laundry. Maybe you persuaded someone to give you $5. Persuading is actually what we do often. And even though it sounds complicated, it really is pretty easy.